Everyone thinks they know what caused the Bengal famine. They'll tell you it was the war, bad weather, maybe just bad luck. But here's the thing, my friend. What happened in Bengal in 1943 wasn't a natural disaster. It was a man-made catastrophe, engineered by colonial policy, wartime greed, and a government that simply did not care whether millions of brown people lived or died. And the more you dig into the details, the harder it becomes to call this anything other than what it was. A crime dressed up as a tragedy. Let me take you back to the early 1940s. The world is on fire. World War II is raging across every continent. And Bengal, this lush, fertile region in eastern India, is one of the most productive rice-growing areas on the planet. The people there aren't wealthy, but they eat. They survive. They have a system that works, even if it's far from perfect. Generations of farmers have built a rhythm around the monsoon, the harvest, and the market. Life is hard, but it moves forward. It's not paradise, but it's home. Then the Japanese take Burma, and everything changes. See, Burma was Bengal's rice lifeline. A huge chunk of Bengal's rice imports came from there. When Japan conquered Burma in early 1942, that supply line was severed overnight. But here's what most people don't tell you. The loss of Burmese rice alone wouldn't have caused a famine. Bengal still produced enough rice to feed its own people. The math worked out. The deficit from Burma was real, but it was manageable. Bengal had dealt with supply disruptions before. It wasn't a region that collapsed at the first sign of trouble. So what went wrong? The British went wrong. That's what happened. After the fall of Burma, the colonial government in India panicked. They were terrified that Japan would invade Bengal next. So they launched what they called a denial policy. Sounds bureaucratic and boring, right? It was anything but. The denial policy meant the British systematically destroyed thousands of boats in coastal Bengal, fishing boats, transport boats, the boats that moved rice from surplus areas to deficit areas. They confiscated rice stocks from coastal regions. They burned granaries. They dismantled the entire logistical backbone of a region that depended on water transport, the way a modern city depends on highways. The logic was simple and brutal. If Japan invades, they'll find nothing useful. The cost. Bengali lives. But those lives didn't factor into the imperial calculation, buddy. They never had. And it gets worse. While the denial policy was gutting Bengal's internal food distribution, something else was happening. Wartime inflation. The British were printing money to fund the war effort. Prices skyrocketed. Rice that cost 6 rupees a mond in 1942 shot up to 40 rupees by mid-1943. For ordinary Bengalis, day laborers, sharecroppers, weavers, rickshaw pullers, this wasn't just inflation. It was a death sentence. Their wages stayed flat while the cost of staying alive multiplied sevenfold. They simply couldn't afford to eat anymore. Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the food you bought yesterday now costs 7 times more, and your paycheck hasn't changed by a single rupee. Now here's where the class dimension becomes impossible to ignore. During the entire famine, Bengal's rice production was not catastrophically low. There was rice in Bengal. It was sitting in warehouses. Merchants were hoarding it, speculating on prices, waiting for them to climb even higher. The colonial government knew this was happening. They did almost nothing to stop it. Why? Because those merchants were part of the system. They supplied the military. They financed the war effort. They were useful to the empire. The starving millions in the countryside, they were not useful. In the cold arithmetic of empire, a dead peasant is a statistic, but a profitable grain dealer is a strategic asset. Let me paint you a picture of what that looked like on the ground, my friend. By mid-1943, the roads leading into Calcutta were lined with walking skeletons. Entire families, mothers carrying dead babies, children with bellies swollen from starvation, streamed into the city looking for food. They collapsed on sidewalks. They died in gutters. Dogs fed on corpses in broad daylight. The restaurants in Calcutta were still serving full meals to British officers and wealthy Indians, while people literally starved to death outside their windows. The contrast wasn't just obscene. It was the system working exactly as designed. Comfort for the rulers, death for the ruled. And what was Winston Churchill doing during all this? He was cracking jokes. When informed about the famine, Churchill allegedly responded by asking why Gandhi hadn't died yet. When his own Secretary of State for India, Leo Amery, begged for food shipments to Bengal, Churchill dismissed the request. He diverted food supplies away from India to build up stockpiles in Europe, not even for immediate military use, but as reserves for after the war. Australian wheat ships that could have saved thousands of lives were redirected to the Mediterranean. Canada offered to send grain. The offer was turned down. Other dominions raised the alarm. They were ignored. Ship after ship passed through the Indian Ocean carrying food that could have ended the crisis, and not one of them was allowed to stop. Churchill's attitude wasn't just callous, it was ideological. He genuinely believed that Indians were, in his words, a beastly people with a beastly religion. He saw the famine not as a crisis to be solved, but as a natural consequence of what he considered Indian backwardness. This wasn't a failure of logistics, buddy. This was a failure of humanity at the highest levels of power. The numbers are staggering. The official British estimate put the death toll at 1.5 million. Modern historians believe it was closer to 3 million. 3 million people. And that's a conservative estimate. Some researchers argue the true toll, including delayed deaths from disease and malnutrition in the months and years that followed, could be as high as 5 million. To put that in perspective, that's more than the combined civilian death toll of the Blitz, the firebombing of Tokyo, and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yet most people in the West have never even heard of it. It doesn't appear in their school textbooks. It doesn't feature in their war movies. It's a footnote, if it's mentioned at all. But here's the thing that really gets under my skin. The Bengal famine wasn't unique. It was the latest in a long series of colonial famines in India. The Great Famine of 1876 to 78 killed over 5 million. The famine of 1896 to 1902 killed millions more. In every single case, the pattern was the same. India was producing enough food, but colonial policies, export-first economics, free market fundamentalism, refusal to intervene in grain markets, ensured that food went to those who could pay, rather than those who needed to eat. The empire had perfected a system that could watch people die and call it sound economic policy. The economist Amartya Sen won the Nobel Prize partly for demonstrating this exact point. Famines, he argued, are not caused by lack of food. They're caused by lack of access to food. And in colonial Bengal, access was determined by your position in the imperial hierarchy. If you were useful to the war machine, you ate. If you weren't, you starved. It's that brutally simple. Sen grew up in Bengal. He saw the famine with his own eyes as a 9-year-old child. He watched people come to his family's door begging for scraps. When he later built his academic career around the politics of hunger, it wasn't abstract theory. It was memory. The aftermath was equally telling. After the war, the British government launched an inquiry, the Famine Inquiry Commission. Its findings were predictably soft on colonial responsibility. It blamed the cyclone of 1942, the fall of Burma, and administrative failures. without ever pointing the finger at the deliberate policy choices that created the conditions for mass death. The denial policy was barely mentioned. Churchill's role was completely ignored. The report read less like an honest investigation and more like a carefully constructed exercise in imperial self-preservation, the art of looking the other way while wearing a serious face. And here's the final bitter irony, my friend. The same Bengal that was left to starve in 1943 had been one of the jewels of the British Empire, a region whose wealth had helped build modern Britain. The textile industries of Bengal were systematically destroyed in the 19th century to protect British manufacturing. The tax revenues extracted from Bengal funded wars across 3 continents. And when Bengal needed help, when millions of its people were dying, the empire turned its back. The wealth flowed out for 2 centuries: cotton, jute, indigo, opium, tax revenue, all of it siphoned to London. When it was time for something to flow back in, the doors were shut. The Bengal Famine of 1943 isn't just a historical tragedy. It's a case study in how empires work. Resources flow upward, from colony to metropole. Risks flow downward, from rulers to subjects. And when the system breaks, when war, inflation, and natural disaster converge, it's always the people at the bottom who pay the price, not with their money, with their lives. So the next time someone tells you that the British Empire brought civilization and progress to India, remember Bengal. Remember the 3 million. Remember that the greatest famine of the 20th century wasn't caused by drought or flood or crop failure. It was caused by policy, by choices, by an empire that decided some lives were worth less than others. That, buddy, is the real story of the Bengal famine, and it's a story that still matters today.